Well, hello and welcome to another video by Financial Learning. On today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the Bitcoin mining sector. It has been a short week this week for the miners. We're going to be taking a look at the price and also the short ranks as of July 3rd. We're also going to be talking about the fact that out of the 15 companies that I do cover, 14 of them did close the week with double-digit gains, and 8 out of the 15 actually had 20% or more in terms of price appreciation over just this short week. Outside of that, of course, we'll look at the short rankings. We're also going to take a look at some of the news articles that did come out over this last short week. And we're going to compare the price of the Bitcoin mining sector against the price of Bitcoin. And also, I did have a request to go ahead and add in MicroStrategy. So we're also going to be comparing the mining sector against MicroStrategy. So with all that, we're also going to take a look at the top 5 most shorted Bitcoin mining stocks. It's going to be a very exciting video if you're a Bitcoin mining investor. So without further ado, let's get right into it. All right, jumping into this, the first thing I want to talk about is going to be on the far left, and that is going to be these 15 Bitcoin mining stocks. You can see their ticker symbols listed here, and you're going to see a couple of them that are highlighted yellow, and that's because their short ranking did change compared to just 1 week ago. Moving over on the next few columns, we're going to take a look at the June 27th price and compare that against the July 3rd price. And then for that, we're going to take a look at the max pain and the weekly price changes. So before we talk about weekly price change, let's back up and mention max pain. You can see here that all but one of these companies are actually above that max pain price that's expected for July 11th. So it's going to be interesting to see if these market makers went ahead and hedged their bets and did purchase some of these shares to protect them in the case that some of these options traders will exercise their right for shares. Outside of that, talking about the weekly percent, I already mentioned it, but let's talk again about that. You can see some of the highest in terms of weekly change. We'll start with some of these bolded ones. TeraWulf had a 24.6% weekly price change, and also BTDR had a 24.2% change. And then the highest of the overall stocks that I want to talk about is going to be BTBT with a 46.3% increase on share price. Now, we did have a few other ones. Definitely want to mention CIFR with a 42% increase in their price, and Hut8 with a 24, and also IREN with a 20.1. IREN barely squeaked in on this 20% or more club, but they were able to finish the week off in that specific category. And then a few other ones. We can see here that Bitfarms actually had a pretty good week at 36.7%. We'll talk about the fact that Riot has been selling some of their shares again. There was a press release on that. But before we do, one last company to mention is going to be HIVE with a 28.3% price change for the week. So overall, the Bitcoin mining sector had an excellent week. You can see here that every single one of these companies actually finished the week green, with some of them having very, very high price appreciation. But moving on past that, let's talk now about these shares short value, and short percent. And of course, these companies are ranked based on that short percent. And you can tell based on the fact that these cells are highlighted either red, green, or white. The red cells mean that the short percent did drop. The ones that are white means that the actual short percent remained flat. And then I do have two companies where the short interest actually increased. Overall, it looks like a lot of the shorts did end up closing some of their positions. We did have some significant price appreciation. So, of course, shorts will become buyers. So they were part of the buying volume this past week. But we'll take a look now at some of the free float items. I did want to talk about some of the noteworthy changes in terms of the free float quantity. You can see here that Hut8 actually had a 8,870,000 share price change. And you can see one other noteworthy one is going to be CANG with a 30 million share change. So we actually had a little bit of dilution happening this past week. And of course, a lot of these companies are either getting involved with share offerings or utilizing their ATM. It does make sense with the price appreciation that they would use this volume run up in order for them to be able to get a little bit of equity out of their share count. Now, past that, we're going to take a look now at that weekly short percent. So we already looked at the daily, but looking at the weekly, a couple of noteworthy ones to mention. We'll jump down and look at that 2.42%, and that's going to be for CIFR. They did have an increase on their short interest ranking with respect to their free float when looking at them compared to the overall sector. However, it didn't really impact the fact that their price just soared this week at a 42% increase. Now we'll take that. Now let's talk about some of the ones where the short interest did drop for the week. The first one I'll talk about is actually going to be HUT8. They had a negative 1.56%, so the shorts were closing there for HUT8, and they actually finished again at a 24% price increase for the week. A couple other ones I did want to mention, the first of which is going to be CANG with a negative 1.23%. So although there was a significant amount of shares being added to the float, we did see that short interest position getting reduced. Now, of course, as more shares are added to the common share count, it actually does impact the short interest and it actually reduces that short interest. So just keep that in mind when you're taking a look at some of the short interest. It could have to do with the fact that there are now more shares in that common share count. Now, outside of that, let's talk about some of the new updates for the week. I'm going to start first with Mara. They did announce their Bitcoin mining numbers for the month of June, and they also mentioned that they do plan on reaching 75 exahash by the end of the calendar year. Now, in terms of their monthly mining numbers, they did mine a total of 713 Bitcoin. They had an average hash rate at 57.4, and they had just about 50,000 Bitcoin in their treasury, and that was as of July 1st. So I'm sure as of July 3rd, they have hit that 50,000 Bitcoin mark. All right, and the next one I want to talk about is going to be Riot. They actually sold 2,802,000 of Bitfarms common shares back into the open market. And on top of that, they did announce their monthly mining numbers. So they mined a 450 Bitcoin. They have a total HODL now sitting at 19,273, and their hash rate came in at 35.5, and fleet efficiency was 21.2 joules per terahash. So quite a lot of updates there for Riot. And of course, their share price was around 15.4%. So not one of these banger 20% or higher ones, but still pretty good appreciation in terms of that share price. Now we'll see how that may have been impactful due to the price of Bitcoin in just a little bit. But moving down the list, the next one I want to talk about is going to be CIFR. Now they had a darling of a week at 42% price increase, and here are some of the news articles that did come out this past week. First off is going to be the fact that at their Black Pearl location, they actually achieved higher than they had originally announced, and they are currently hashing at 3.4 exahash at that location. Their total hash rate came in at 16.8, and they did announce their mining numbers. They mined 160 Bitcoin in the month of June, and they currently have a HODL of 1,063 Bitcoin. They also talked about their fleet efficiency coming in at 20.8. Next up is going to be HUT8. They actually energized their Vega data center. This data center is supposed to be the largest single building in terms of hash rate and overall power consumption as a Bitcoin mining facility. And it is actually going to have a total of 205 megawatts operating once they are fully energized there. And it will actually house 15 exahash. Now they are actually putting in some of the latest and greatest of the Bitmain, some of their hydro-cooled technology. So they will be getting efficiency ratings around 13 joules per terahash at this location. So it's going to be pretty exciting to see HUT8 energizing all of these new miners as they will be getting a nice boost in terms of their monthly Bitcoin mining numbers. And they also had another one of their press releases come out, and this one was pretty interesting because I think some people may forget the fact that HUT8 is also a power generation provider, and they did announce that they got a total of 310 megawatts, and this is across 4 of their sites, and this contract is with IESO. So great news for HUT8. Now they have some very stable cash flow that they'll be able to put back into their business as they continue scaling both Bitcoin and this HPC AI data center side. Outside of them, I also want to talk about IREN. They had a couple updates as well. IREN hit their mid-year target at 15 exahash a couple days after CleanSpark did. They also announced that they did purchase 2.4 thousand NVIDIA Blackwell B200 and B300 GPU chips. and that total purchase price came in around $130 million. So again, they are scaling up for their HPC AI data center. I have yet to see an announcement in terms of their customer, but I'm sure we will be getting announcements in the weeks and months to come for that. Outside of IREN, the next one I want to talk about is actually going to be BTBT. Now, they announced a share offering. They were able to raise $162.9 million, but they did end up having to offer 86,250,000 of their common shares as part of this share offering in order to raise some additional capital. Now they can use this for some of their operating expenses. Now, the last company that I did want to talk about is going to be CANG. They did put out their June mining numbers as well, and they mined a total of 450 Bitcoin in the month of June, and they had a total hash rate at 32 exahash. They also announced that as of June 24th, they did close that acquisition, which got them additional 18 exahash with those additional racked miners, and that actually puts them at a total of 50 exahash. So now we have a total of 4 companies that have already approached that 50 exahash on this specific list that I do cover. Mara, of course, next was CleanSpark, then IREN, and now CANG. So it's getting very, very competitive here in terms of Bitcoin mining numbers. Now, I do know that IREN has decided to pause additional scaling of their hash rate so they can focus on their HPC AI data center side of their business. So I think it's going to be interesting in the months to come. How does CleanSpark, CANG, and Mara respond? Of course, Mara already put out that they plan on hitting 75 exahash, so they will be scaling very rapidly in the next few months. So with all of that, now let's look at the overall sector on the weekly and the monthly. First thing I want to point out is going to be their shares short. We do see an increase on total number of shares short, which is why I do have it coming in at green. However, there was a significant amount of dilution. So the actual short percent actually did get reduced by negative 0.16% for the overall mining sector. And you can see that there was a total of 38,590 shares being added to this sector free float. And of course, that's the net amount because there was a few of these companies where the free float number actually was reduced. So that could have been just an Ortex estimate getting adjusted, or we could have had some potential buyback, or maybe some of these shares were being purchased by various insiders, which would actually take them out of the common share count amount. Outside of that, let's look at that free float value. This is a very exciting update. They actually had an increase on their free float value by $5 billion, $5,118,000,000 to be more specific. And that actually gave this overall Bitcoin mining sector a free float value increase of 19.69% for the week. Incredible week, almost hit 20% for the overall sector. Now, looking at the month, we can actually see a reduction on the overall number of shares being shorted, and that is by negative 12,419,000. And we can also see the short percent getting reduced by a negative 1.22%. So again, it looks like the shorts are starting to back off a little bit on the Bitcoin mining sector. Of course, I do think that's because we saw a little bit of a level of difficulty being dropped, and we do see the price of Bitcoin continue to increase. So that does provide profitability for a lot of these Bitcoin miners. Now, moving on past that, let's continue looking on the monthly. We're going to see that there's been a monthly free float value appreciation of $7,338,000,000. So again, a lot of money has been pouring into these 15 companies that I cover, and the free float value actually appreciated by 30.87%. So incredible, incredible week. And so far, it's an incredible month of June for these Bitcoin miners. Now, looking at the price of Bitcoin, now let's compare that on the weekly and monthly so we can see just how big of a difference is it when you look at these leveraged miners compared to Bitcoin itself. So Bitcoin actually closed as of the end of the day on Thursday at $109,639. So that is an increase in price per Bitcoin of $2,359 or a 2.2%. Now, before I talk about the monthly, I also added MicroStrategy on here, again, as I did have one of the viewers put out a request for that. So again, if you ever have any requests, please put in the comments and I'll do what I can to accommodate. So MicroStrategy last price showed at $403.99. That is an increase of $18.99, so a 4.7% increase for MicroStrategy. So if you look at MicroStrategy compared to the overall mining sector, not quite as high on the weekly. Now let's take a look at the monthly for Bitcoin. Now the last price as of June 6th was $104,390. So that's a monthly increase of $5,248 for the price of Bitcoin. And that actually gave them a 4.8% increase for the overall month. MicroStrategy increased by $29.52. So that is a price increase of 7.3% on the month. So again, looking at MicroStrategy and Bitcoin, they are trending pretty well. And that's because MicroStrategy, for the most part, is just mirroring price of Bitcoin by purchasing more and more spot Bitcoin. And that is how their company is able to provide value to shareholders. As the price of Bitcoin increases, so does their overall asset. And with all that, let's now jump into the top 5 most shorted Bitcoin mining stocks for this short week as of July 3rd. Coming in at number 5 on our list is CleanSpark Inc. That is ticker symbol CLSK. Had a short interest with respect to free float of 23.92. But comparing that to a week ago, it was 25.5. So a decrease on short interest. And that decrease is actually a negative 6.2%. So a pretty significant drop in short interest for a CleanSpark. Moving on, taking a look at that short interest days to cover, it's currently at 2.43 days. And then utilization for CleanSpark is at 72.39%. Of course, utilization is going to be the overall number of shares sold short divided by the overall number of shares on loan. Moving on past that, we'll take a look at the short score. It's at 73.73. Now, draw your attention to the bottom left. This is going to be the price graph. You're going to see this on the next 5 companies, starting, of course, with CleanSpark here. And this is about a monthly view. And you could see here that CleanSpark did have a slight drop on this Thursday when comparing to the rest of the week. And they've had a pretty good run if you look back as far back as about the 22nd of June. They had quite a few green days, so it's a slight pullback for CleanSpark. We have yet to hear their monthly mining numbers for the month of June, so I'll be interested to see if that has any impact at all on shareholders when we start the next week up. Now, moving on past that, look in the bottom right, you're going to see the live short interest data. This is the Ortex estimate data. In this case, we're talking about the Thursday trading period because we did have the short week with the 4th of July being on a Friday. So taking a look at that, this is for that Thursday trading period. It was a 24.22%, so a slight increase on short interest with respect to free float for CleanSpark. Taking a look at the Interactive Brokers short availability, last reported shares available was 1.1 million with a cost to borrow of 0.49%. And coming in at number 4 on our list is Riot Platforms, that is ticker symbol RIOT. They had a short interest with respect to free float of 25.12%. When comparing that to a week ago, it was 25.08. So a very slight increase on short interest with respect to free float for Riot. Moving over into days to cover, currently at 2.38 days, and then utilization is at a very low 39.11%. Short score for Riot is at a 64.87. Moving down to the bottom right, you're going to see the live short interest. This is for that Thursday trading period, and it was at a 25.12%. So almost nothing, but if you look at the quantity of shares being sold short, you would see that there's a slight increase of 3,450 shares. So I did actually tag this company as green for the short interest rising. And taking a look at the Interactive Brokers short availability, last reported shares available was 2.3 million with a cost to borrow at 0.47%. And coming in at number 3 on our list is BitDeer, that is ticker symbol BTDR. They had a short interest with respect to a free float of 25.94%. Comparing that to a week ago, it actually remained flat, still at 25.94. Moving over into days to cover, currently at 4.29 days, and then utilization sitting very high, but not at 100 anymore, at a 94.07%. Short score for BitDeer is at an 80.57. Now moving down to the bottom right, you're going to take a look at that live short interest data. This is that Ortex estimate for the Thursday trading period, and it currently is still sitting at a 25.94%. So again, a flat week and a flat day on short interest for BitDeer. And taking a look at the Interactive Brokers short availability, last reported shares available came in at 1.3 million with a cost to borrow at 2.61. I think it's pretty interesting that the cost to borrow remains pretty high when you compare this with the remaining Bitcoin mining sector stocks, but yet the utilization still remains rather high as well. Whoever the short interest holders are, their actual value is beginning to degrade a little bit. So I'm going to find it very interesting if they continue to hold this longer term. But I guess we're just going to have to wait and see. And I will continue to cover this week over week with you all. And coming in at number 2 on our list is Mara Holdings, that is ticker symbol MARA. They had a short interest with respect to a free float of 27.87%. When comparing that to a week ago, it was 28.75%. So a decrease on short interest with respect to free float for Mara. Moving over into days to cover, currently at 2.16 days, and then utilization for Mara is at 74.99%. Short score is at a 71.54. Now moving down into the live short interest, this is the Ortex estimate data for this Thursday trading period, currently sitting at a 27.81%. So that is another decrease on short interest with respect to free float, comparing that Thursday and Wednesday trading period for Mara. And taking a look at the Interactive Broker short availability, last reported shares available was 3.2 million, with a cost to borrow at 0.51%. And coming in at number 1 for another week in a row is terawulf. That is ticker symbol WULF. They had a short interest with respect to a free float of 29.49%. But comparing that to a week ago, it was 30.26%. So a slight decrease on short interest with respect to free float for terawulf. Moving over to days to cover, currently at just 1.99 days. And utilization for terawulf is sitting at a 63.3%. Short score is at a 67.55. Moving down into that live short interest data, this is for that Thursday trading period. This is, of course, an Ortex estimate. Their short percent was 29.36%. So another decrease on short interest with respect to free float for terawulf. And take a look at the Interactive Broker short availability. Last reported shares available was 6.6 million with a cost of borrow of 0.53%. All right, and that about wraps it up for me, folks. I hope you enjoyed this quick sector update. Took a look at that short percent rank, as well as the max pain for the upcoming week. We also looked at the weekly short percent and then took a look at some of the Bitcoin miner news and events that took place over this past week. Outside of that, we compared the overall sector on the weekly and monthly, compared it to the price of Bitcoin, and then I did add in MicroStrategy as requested. So I hope you all did enjoy this sector update, and if you did, consider giving the video a like, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and drop a comment. Let me know your thoughts about the mining sector. Which one of these companies are you holding the largest portfolio of? Love to get your feedback and love to hear from you. And with all that said, hope you all have a great rest of your day. Keep calm, hash on, and I'll see you on the next one.